Dirya Nashta Prayashu Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevya Bhagavati Utamashaki Bhaktir Bhavati Neshtaki Nigamaka Padugaritam Padam Shukamakamita Dravya Samitam Pingata Bhagatam Masaryam Mahora Hora Shikabhuvagam Krishna Swadam Bhagate Damagini Hishaha Karunashta Dvishamasha Paranako Dinoditaham Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinu Bandhu Jagatpate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radhikanta Namostute Jayatam Saruto Pango Mama Manir Matergati Matsava Shaparambo Jaradana Madana Moram Siman Rasa Rasaram Vamsi Vada Karsan Venershanopi Gopanata Sri Isram Divyad Vrindananya Kapadrumada Srimad Radnagara Shimashanishto Sri Radha Shilagovana Prestadavi Seva Manush Marami Namo Brahmane Davaya Go Brahmani Taya Chajigari Taya Krishnaya Govindaya Namo Namaha Mangalang Bhagavan Vishnu Magaram Gudabhija Mangaram Panadikaksham Mangarayatanohari Om Narayanaya Vimhi Vasudevaya Dhimhi Tano Vishnu Prachodyatehe Om Mahadevi Chavidnihi Vishnu Padnichadimhi Tano Lakshmi Prachodyatehe Mahalakshmi Namastuvyam Namastuvyam Suresuri Hari Priya Namastuvyam Namastuvyam Nadite Taptakanjana Gorangira Hari Vindavaneshwari Vishavanasute Devi Pranamani Hari Priya Om Ganati Mirandasya Ganagana Sarakya Chaksurun Militam Yanatashmai Shri Gurave Nama Sri Chaitanya Manobishtam Shtapitam Yarabhutare Shaham Rupa Karamayam Darati Shwaparandikam Vandeham Sri Guru Siyata Parakamanam Shri Gurun Vaishnavam Shri Rupam Shagaritam Sahagana Raganapatam Vitam Samsedevam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Paran Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakan Vitam Shah Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pistaya Bhutare Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Tinamanaste Sarasati Devi Guravani Pachari Nivashes Sunivadi Paskada Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shiva Sari Gaur Bhakta Vrindam Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Good morning. Peculiarity of yesterday was that the Facebook sidebar where people could comments was blank during the whole of my talk. There was no indication that anybody was on board, and there was no manifestation of your comments, your emojis, or anything. It was only when I revisited the site later on in the afternoon, about 3:30, that I saw all of your comments. So sorry I didn't acknowledge you or say anything about your comments because the fact of the matter was I didn't see any, some sort of a glitch in the live stream to Facebook. But I see Shali this morning. I see Kelly. I see Vallabha Chandra. So I guess we're back to normal. Just bring you up to date. I probably mentioned we had one of our two pujaris arrive last week on Wednesday, Dita Pavana, Bengali fellow serving in Siliguri, transferred here to America. Very nice fellow. He spent 3 days here in Spanish Fork before we transferred him to Salt Lake City. He sang the arti Saturday night and apparently made a very favorable impression. Kapil told me that his wife had some sort of a mystic experience while listening to his arti. I think she felt uh, our version of rapture. And the boys, Kapil's boys, Ishan and Shivan, who are both good drum players in kirtan, they also were enamored and very delighted that someone with such a beautiful voice and such musical skills is now amongst us in Salt Lake City. Of course, we have as our resident devotee here in Spanish Fork, Agni Dev, who's one of the preeminent kirtaniyas in all of ISKCON. He's in India for 3 weeks, but when he comes back, there's going to be some. we're going to have some. We're going to have to do some scheduling here and try and keep everybody happy because we're from having no kirtan, from having me as your main kirtan singer. Now we've got two of the best kirtan singers I've ever heard here in Utah. And one more on the way. I don't know what Gopinath Priya, I don't know what his level of musical ability is, but anyway. That was one piece of news and another piece of news. Yeah, so if you're able to commute to Salt Lake City on any given Saturday night, and you'll look forward to the singing. I'll be up there this Saturday. I'm scheduled to give the Bhagavatam and the motivational talk as well. Oh, the other thing I wanted to mention was that in our Zoom meeting, we have Zoom meetings every Tuesday night with some of the leaders in Salt Lake City. So again, Kapil mentioned how much he was impressed with Vallabha Chandra's talk. He said very simple, very clear, very well done, very professional. So if you're listening, Vallabha Chandra, Kapil send you his respects. Kapil is an aficionado of public speaking. I think one of the things that's most attractive about Krishna consciousness to Kapil is being able to practice and hone public speaking and communication skills. And that's especially exciting when the subject matter you're communicating is the means by which the soul can get back to home, back to God, and experience eternal life full of bliss and knowledge. Otherwise, our theme for about 2 weeks now, as we've been discussing the 10th verse in the 3rd chapter 11 of the 8th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, is that we, on our own powers, we cannot approach Krishna. We don't have the mental power. We don't have the visual power. We don't have the vocal power to bring Krishna within the realm of our sensual experiences. There are so many statements to the effect that we're woefully under-equipped to measure Krishna, how high he is, how broad he is, to possess him by force of will or force of intellect or force of even beautiful prayers, even chanting japa, even making flower garlands, even performing the activities of devotional service. Those in and of themselves are not guaranteed to deliver Krishna within the purview of our senses. There has to be the intention. All these activities are meant to trigger the heartfelt desire of the soul to go back to the Supreme Soul, to fold ourselves once again in his loving embrace. If that heartfelt cry is not there, it won't get you back home, back to God, and even doing all the various elements of chanting Hare Krishna and taking prasad. Yesterday, we entitled the talk No Entry Sign. We didn't quite reach that theme. So we've again used that title, No Entry Sign. But first, let me give you an example. I don't know whether we talked about this before or not, but a little child, a little toddler who's barely able to walk, maybe just recently has been able to support himself vertically on his 2 legs. There isn't any way that child can climb under the shoulders of the father. It's just too daunting a project. It doesn't matter how he exercises his legs or how he exercises the muscles of his little arm. He's just not going to be able to crawl 6 feet up and place himself on the shoulders of his father by his own efforts. However, that doesn't mean he should give up. That doesn't mean he should be discouraged. There is a way. If the father agrees, he can't go up to the father's shoulder, but the father can bend down, come down to his level, and place the child on his shoulders. Similarly, we can't force the Lord to appear before us by any of our accomplishments or achievements, good look or wealth or knowledge of the scriptures or quantity of rounds we've chanted. But if in all of that we muster up sincerity, a sense of helplessness and dependency, if we can cry out with our inner voice to the Lord cannot resist acceding to the desire of the devotee. If a little child wails in a heartfelt way, there's nothing, the father cannot even begin to resist when he sees a little child raising his stubby arms and calling out to the father. There is nothing that the father would rather do than come down to the child's level, put him on his shoulders, go back upright, and then just hear the little child's squeals of delight. So it's at one and the same time true to say that the child can never get on the shoulders of the father, but that's not a reason for discouragement because we know the nature, the paternal spirit is to agree to what the child wants, to make, there's nothing that makes the father happier than making the child happier. In our temples, there's, as you tour, wander around the temple complexes, in most cases, you'll come upon a door that says no entry, no entry. Uh, Similarly, many of the verses, particularly this 10th verse, which we've been discussing, it on one level, it's saying you can't get Krishna. You just don't have what it takes. And so in a sense, it's the verse itself and previous verses are saying there's no entry, entry prohibited. But think about it for a second. If nobody could go through that door, why would they have a door in the first place? If the idea was to keep everybody out, why would why would they have a door in the first place? Just just have a wall there. So when you have a sign that says no entry in the temple, it doesn't mean that nobody can go there. It just means that only qualified priests and pujaris can go there. In our Hare Krishna temple, we prescribe no illicit sex, no meeting, no gambling, no intoxication. Those are the negatives, and then the positive is chant 16 rounds a day. If a new person wants to become serious about purifying their hearts and making spiritual advancement, they'll try just come up to that benchmark, chanting 16 rounds a day, following the regulative principles. After one has followed those for 6 months to a year, depending on the conditions of a particular guru, one can then get diksha, one can get first initiation, sometimes called Hari Nam. It means you've been chanting 16 rounds and following the principles for, in most cases, a year or so. And then after another year of continuing following those principles, uh, the option is there to get Brahmin initiation, get your sacred thread. Now, for someone who's been following the regulative principles and chanting 16 rounds for 2 years, it's presumed that the consciousness is sufficiently purified that now one can go through that door that says no entry. Not everybody is going to go 2 years chanting 16 rounds and following the regular principles. Not everybody can follow that. Even people that initially are sincere can often step back and desist. They may follow to the level they feel they're capable, but not to that level. Therefore, the no entry sign is not for everybody. It's not excluding everybody, but it is excluding most people who are not willing to pay the price for chanting their prescribed number of rounds and following the principles for 2 years. And it's not just that. 2 years is an indication of a higher standard of purity than from someone who's just recently come or walked off the street and is still struggling by giving up bad habits. But it's also a promise that one will continue to follow those principles. There's a higher likelihood of someone who's already been following the principles and chanting Hare Krishna for 2 years. There's a higher likelihood of that person continuing to follow the principles if they've already been doing it for 2 years. There's a much lower likelihood of someone who's just recently come of following the principles for the rest of their lives and chanting 16 rounds a day. Therefore, there's a no entry sign, which means number one, only those who are practicing according to the orders of the spiritual master and who have been practicing for 2 years. And then for those people, we make the assumption that there's a much higher likelihood, having done it for 2 years, gotten over the worst of it, the withdrawal signs, the bumpy, rocky road from distancing yourself from illicit sex, meat, intoxication, and gambling, that one is now broken free. You know, when a rocket takes off from Cape Canaveral, the toughest part, what it consumes the most fuel, as the first 100 feet or so. 80% of the fuel is expended on liftoff. Then once you get lifted off and you get a little bit of momentum, there's less and less fuel needed. And then once you break through 25 or 30 miles up, you break through the pull of gravity into the stratosphere. I don't think they even need fuel. It's just a matter of guiding. You've got thrust, you've got propulsion. So someone who's been following for 2 years, presumably it's gotten a lot easier for them. It's now a lifestyle. It's natural. Any hankerings or second thoughts or regrets are behind them. The sign there, no entry, means that if you're just new, if you're not up to the standard, if you haven't been following the standard for a prescribed amount of time, then that was what's on the other side of that door is not for you. You're meant to be in front of the altar and not behind the altar, which is fine, which is fine. Beautiful thing about our culture is that while there's the high bar, the high standard, there's also options for people to take what they can to go as far as they feel they're capable of going. But if a newcomer comes and sees the no entry sign, they might misunderstand that to mean that they could never enter that door. They could never perform the activities of a priest and perform those special functions. I visited Udupi, which is in Karnataka state, the west coast of India. That's a temple there that's found by Madhvacharya. And there are eight mats, there are eight temples around the temple. The temple itself is on a circle. The main temple there, and then there's a circle, and there are eight other mosques in that circle. This is downtown. Instead of having the financial district, restaurants and bars and nightclubs, this beautiful spiritual town has 9 temples downtown. It's downtown. If you're staying in that town from 3 o'clock in the morning over loudspeakers, the young students from the Sanskrit school will be up in the pre-dawn hours chanting Purusha Shukta, Narayana Shukta, Sri Shukta, and it's broadcast over the loudspeakers. No one can sleep in. There's no question of sleeping past the rising of the sun. Everybody's pretty much obliged to be awake by 4:30 in the morning. And there's a number of people in the semi-dark there. Everyone moves towards the temple for the Mangal Arti. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. Now, I'm trying to think of my point. I just lost the train of my thought. Oh yeah, 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 yeah. So established by Madhvacharya, who appeared in the 1200s, the system of worshiping the deity, there's each moth has dozens and dozens of members. They all follow a monastic life. They're celibate. They chant. They eat very simply. They're all very skinny. They're all like scarecrows. There isn't an ounce of fat on any of them. But there's a seer. There's one head of each one of the 8 moths, and he's even more austere than the others. Just to give you an example, there's a big pavilion behind the square. It can hold 1,000 people easily. There are no seats. Everyone's used to sitting cross-legged on the concrete, but it's covered in case there should be rainfall or excessive sunlight. And then there's an elevated seat. And whoever is the seer, every seer, every head of each moth takes 2 years, and they rotate. They rotate. So once every 16 years, the seer of the moth worships the deity in the little deity room. There's only that one person who's allowed access, and he spends several hours in the morning, a couple hours at noon, and some time in the evening serving the deity personally. And this is the head of the mosque, the most austere, the most learned. And part of this particular seer's duties is that from 4 to 6 in the afternoon, he sits on this elevated seat in this pavilion. There's no pillow on the seat. And this is a skinny guy, you know. You could imagine his tailbone is on this hard, unforgiving wooden platform. No mat. If there's a mat, it's a quarter of an inch and not even visible to the eye. And he speaks for 2 hours. When we were there, Jai Krishna and I visited. The seer was speaking on the Vishnu Sahasranama, 1,000 names of Vishnu. He was giving 5 or 6 2-hour talks on each one of the 1,000 names of Vishnu. This is the way he was spending the 2 years that he worshiped the deities. So no ordinary person can do this, serve the deities without hardly eating anything or sleeping anything, serve the deities exclusively for hours a day, discourse extensively and expansively with lots of references on the 1,000 names of Vishnu. When every night there's a procession, there's a parade. They have the Rath carts in the south are designed differently than the Rath carts, for instance, in Puri. The Rath carts in the south are quite high. And they have these onion domes. They're really quite beautiful. We have a miniature version here in Spanish for it. So every evening there's a parade around the circle. They take the deities, and it's quite high where the deities go. And of course, it's not the main deities. They have little brass utsav deities or processional deities. So nobody but the seer himself, he takes those two deities in his hands and he climbs this high ladder and he sits in this little part of the Roth cart while everyone pulls the cart around. It takes about 45 minutes. There's a lot of singing, a lot of kirtan. There's dancing. There's big puppets. There's big 8 foot tall puppets. It's quite a joyous occasion. It's the last official thing from 4:30 in the morning when they have the first ceremony uh, till 8:30, 9 o'clock at night with the procession. And then again, the priest takes the deity down and he goes into the deity room and everything's shut down for the night. Everybody goes to sleep, the whole city, at least when I was there, I don't know, 2012. After 9 o'clock, there's nothing happening in that city. There's no clubs, there's no disco, there's no dancing, there's no cinema. As far as I could tell, there wasn't even TV. Everybody set their schedule. They conducted their day by the schedule of worship of the deity. And this is the way things went on for thousands and thousands of years before you had the invention of electricity and electric lights, and before people used to stay up past sunset late into the night, and then having done that, get up after sunrise in the morning. The whole town uh, schedules itself just by the deities. So there, at 9 o'clock at night, there's nothing to do but go to sleep. And at 4 o'clock in the morning, there's nothing to do but get up because the Sanskrit prayers glorifying the Lord are being broadcast on the loudspeaker. So the reason I digressed in this way was that who you could say no one can worship the deity. No one can worship the deity, but obviously somebody does worship the deity. Out of thousands and thousands of devotees, you have these 8 months, and in these 8 months, there's a seer, which is another word for acharya. He's an exemplary personality, and he gets to spend 2 years in every 16 years doing the intimate service of the deities. And out of 1 million people, you won't find one that could do that. So, for all practical purposes, there's no access to any ordinary or even extraordinary man. It's a specially devoted person who can enter into the deity room there in Udupi and do personal services to Krishna. You wouldn't want anyone of a lesser stature, of a lesser standard of purity. Nevertheless, for us ordinary mortals, after having read the 10th verse, which talks about how you can't force the sun to rise, you can't force the sun to part the clouds, there's nothing you can do to see the sun on a cloudy day, and so on and so on and so forth, one could get discouraged hearing repeatedly uh, through the prayers of Gajendra that Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is so unlimited, so vast. His qualities are innumerable Not only that, but they're constantly expanding. Our One of our volunteers, Trevor, during the evening class a couple days ago, he asked, so when you talk about the expansion of the Krishna's energies, how God is not static, but he's always moving forward, he's always expanding. Are you saying there's an inherent novelty in the energies of the Lord? And I said, yes, that's a very, very good term. Inherent novelty. Even Krishna wonders. Even Krishna stands in amazement at the actions and interactions of his internal and external energies. And so that was a very good term that Trevor threw out there, an inherent novelty in the energies of Krishna. So much so, in fact, that Krishna marvels at the expansion of his own energies. Now, if Krishna himself, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, cannot comprehend all of his energies, how are we, with our limited mind, senses, and vocal cords, going to catch Krishna? We're not. And nevertheless, we find Gajendra. We come upon the scene where he's given up fighting the crocodile. He's reached into the muck of the lake with his trunk. And okay, this is I'm gonna have to do the whole thing now. Gajendra, king of elephants, was sporting on the heavenly planet, courting his wives in the lotus-filled lake, cavorting in the water. He'd snorted some honey with his trunk, and he was cried drunk. Crocodile latched onto his leg with his jaw, and though he trampled and stampeded, he couldn't get the croc to withdraw. In this tug of war, Gajendra was losing the fight to stay upright, being dragged further from the shore, nagged by the reptile, and his strength was flagging day by day. Lacking the backing of the other pachyderms, Gajendra was alone in this danger zone. The water had turned to foam, his friends had flown, and there was no one to phone. Devoid of his fabled strength, at the end of his rope's length, Gajendra's hopes turned to the Lord, who awards protection to his devotees. Gajendra stopped pulling at his leg, which the croc wanted to devour, and he plucked with his trunk from the muck of the lake a lotus flower and offered it, seeking the Lord's power. Krishna, you're the root of creation, the fruit of Vedas, the absolute truth that plays on your flute, the ever-existing youth. Uh, your features are on. Uh, Even Lord Brahma and Shiva cannot leave your lotus feet even for a beat. Your features are unlimited. You're the ingredient of all creatures. Whether they have hands, claws, jaws, or paws, they are all your parts and parcels. You guard those who never depart from the hearth of your sheltering breast. Lord, I confessed, I've messed up, repressed my service, failed the test. But, and here's the key, I'm thirsty for your mercy, which is greater than my mistakes. I'm thirsty for your mercy, which is greater than my mistakes. I've heard that all it takes to awaken your protection is a single cry of helpless affection. Lord, in spite of my shame, I'm calling your name in the middle of the fight. Please reclaim me from the might of the crocodile's bite. When I'm released from the teeth of the croc, block ignorance of my life, lock me into your devotional service. Lord, let my original purpose rise to the surface. I'm knocking at your door. Please keep me close from now until evermore. The result of Gajendra's prayers was that the Lord, who is not accessible to millions and millions and millions of ordinary people, made an exception for Gajendra and appeared before him. When the Lord heard the eloquent prayers of the elephant, and it wasn't exactly the vocabulary, it wasn't it wasn't anything that Gajendra did per se, but it was his heartfelt prayer of hopeless affection. There may have been throughout cosmic history hundreds, if not thousands, of elephants who, while at the water hole taking much needed water, their legs were captured by crocodiles. They were pulled into the river. There may have been hundreds and hundreds of such incidents throughout history. So why are we reading about this elephant thousands and thousands of years later on another planet, no less? For the one simple reason that he did what none others would do. All the other elephants, they resorted on their own strength, and when their own strength expired, they gave up the ghost. And we don't hear about them. There's nothing notable about their history. And yet Gajendra did one simple thing that never occurred to any of these other elephants to do. And of course, he was primed in that way because of this. Formerly King Indradumna, now in elephant form, yet his prayers echoed, weathering the storm. Mantras resurfacing from the past, transcendental sound, awakening memories profound. Even if a devotee falls in the path, Krishna, the heart keeps track. The right time will take up the cycle, carry what you lack. He will get you back home, back to Godhead. Gajendra, elephant king in danger's grip, his mind stripped of arrogance, his history unzipped, recalled mantras from a previous life, cut away his attachment like a knife. The recollection of the previous devotional service he'd done as King Indra in his last life came once again to the surface, and he called out helplessly, without any pretense, without any hypocrisy. He simply called out in helplessness, Krishna, and accompanying his cry of helpless dependence on Krishna, he offered something, because it's better to always never to come to the Lord empty-handed. God's given us so much. Tomorrow we have Thanksgiving Day. It's a time to remember how dependent upon we are to God for millions and millions of blessings. So it's best not to take God's generosity for granted, but whenever you come to the temple, you come to God, you always bring something. It doesn't have to be anything great or expensive or difficult to obtain, but it's just a token of your appreciation that God, you've given me so much, I'll give back. Prabhupada gave the example one time from the powerhouse, from the generator, and there's a huge infrastructure which brings electricity into our outlets. We can't even imagine the engineering that goes behind it, the expense, the money, the infrastructure, the wires. We just turn on the light and the light goes on. We turn on the computer and the computer goes on. But we do have to pay the electric bill at the end of the month. It's not much to pay. It's almost a pittance compared to the benefits that we get from electricity. So similarly, Krishna's not asking much, just that we recognize that we pay a little tax, that we offer him a flower, fruit, leaf, or water. In devotion, that's actually the currency. It's not the item itself, but it's the devotion. So along with his prayers rising up like a fragrance from where Gajendra was mired in the lake, there is the lotus flower, which the elephant is extending in an upward direction in his trunk. And considering all of this, the Lord makes an exception for Gajendra. All he's done is one simple thing. He's cried out to the Lord heartfeltedly. That makes him unique amongst thousands and thousands of other elephants. It may seem a simple thing. Anyone could say, well, I could have done that. But you didn't, you wouldn't, you won't. It takes practice, which Gajendra had put in. He'd paid his dues. He'd put in the time in his previous life. Otherwise, someone could get very discouraged hearing all of the shortcomings which beset us, all of the shortcomings which separate us from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. One of Gajendra's prayers is translated, you're the preserver, the transcendental observer, aloof from this creation, above this creation, aloof like the sun. And yet with your energies, you bless everyone, simultaneously apart from this world and one. Through multipotencies, you manifest your will, creating this universe, your purpose to fulfill. But when it's time to end, you absorb it all back and retract it, just like a spider, or you absorb it all back and retract it just like a spider retracts its web into its sac. It's possible and probable that ordinary people, when they read all these off-putting statements about the limitations of our tongue, our eyes, our speech, and our minds, with the concluding statement that we cannot catch Krishna, it's conceivable that we get discouraged, we get depressed, we get all down, defeatist, interpreting all these statements to mean that Krishna cannot be caught by anyone. But the fact that the pujari door in the temple says no entry simply indicates that there's a very special place on the other side of that door, a very rare and purified place where the deity himself, Krishna himself, the Lord of millions of universes, the savior of Gajendra, the protector of Dhruva Maharaj, the one who is capable of making an exception and appearing before the eyes of those who call out to him in helpless affection, that Lord is installed duly with the proper rites and rituals in the altar and worship with regularity and hygiene, and particularly by those people who have taken the trouble to purify their consciousness over extended periods of time by abstaining from illicit sex, gambling, intoxication, meat eating, and chanting on a regular, consistent basis, 16 rounds of chanting Hare Krishna. Only those who are pujaris, only those who are Brahmins can go through that door. It's not that the restriction is for everyone. It is for most people in our present state. But if you want to turn things around in your life, if you want to shoot for the rhinoceros, you might say, go for the gold, you can acknowledge this is the highest standard of human achievement, the highest standard of human behavior, and you can begin to make those lifestyle changes in your own life, which will eventually enable you to qualify not to see the Lord, but for the Lord to see you. When we see Radharani on the altar beside Krishna, she's got this flower. So it's said that Radharani shares with Krishna information, the latest devotional activities of his devotees. Radharani says, Krishna so-and-so cooked a nice meal for you in Spanish fork. Krishna so-and-so led a beautiful arti for you in Salt Lake City on Saturday night. Radharani is always whispering in Krishna's ear the latest news about those devotees who have pleased him in some way, shape, or form. So we can also become a servant of a servant of a servant of a servant. Not that we get Krishna's ear, not that we get a private audience with Krishna in our present uncultured state, but we can begin, just like Gajendra began as Indradumna in his previous life. He didn't finish, he didn't complete the process, but the good news was he didn't relapse. He didn't sink back either. What he'd learned in his previous life stood him in good stead. It was a permanent asset. And as it says, Krishna within the heart keeps track at the right time. He'll take up the slack. He'll carry what you lack. He will get you back home, back to God. So chant Hare Krishna, the Maha Mantra's call, in this life or the next. It will never fail. Once it's sown, the Bhakti Kripa will grow. Sooner or later, you will go back home, back to Godhead. Similarly, Gajendra has been saying here over and over again, you cannot be understood by our mind, by our intellect, nor through any exercise of our senses. So we have to know that. We have to know that without any doubt. We have to know that Krishna is not available to just anybody. We have to know that before we can begin to take the steps which separate us, which identify us apart from the animalistic activities of people in general, how we raise the bar, how we go to the next level with the help of the devotees and the spiritual master. You know, separating yourself from the crowd is not necessarily mean that you have to do something big and huge and dramatic. You don't have to fight like Arjuna or jump across Lanka like Hanuman. You just have to do things that others are not willing to do. So are you willing to give up meat? Are you willing to give up illicit sex? Are you willing to give up intoxication? Are you willing to give up gambling? None of these things ever did you any good in the first place. So are we smart enough to give up those things which are in our best physical and mental and intellectual interests anyway, and then capitalize on the real benefit of purifying our consciousness, which is eventually to go back home, back to God. Here's one final example. We can end with this today. Imagine a big elephant, a huge elephant, with a mahout on top of that elephant. A little child, he wants to touch the elephant. Uh, so the mahout knows the child, there's no way the child can get on top of the elephant. It's like 20 feet in the air. But if the mahout who's sitting on top of the elephant sees the love of the child, he has the control of the elephant. He, with his goad, he can touch the elephant in a certain way, and the elephant will then come down to the child's level. The elephant will come down due to the appeals and supplication of the mahout. Similarly, we cannot capture Krishna, but Krishna has been captured throughout the ages by those railish souls who come to us in the unbroken chain of cyclic succession, even now in this day of age. They are compared to the mahout, and with their rod of devotion and being authorized by an unbroken chain of cyclic succession extending back through the ages, they can actually give that touch on the head of the elephant that the elephant will come down to the child's level. After which the child can play, can touch the ears, he can touch the trunk. The height of the child is not increased. The ability of the child to climb is not enhanced. But the sincere desire of the child to play with the elephant has come to the attention of the mahout, and the mahout has intervened, interceded on behalf of the child, and given that elephant such directions as the elephant comes down to the level of the child. Now, the elephant lying down is in no way, shape, or form inferior to the elephant standing up. When the elephant's standing up, you can see its power, you can see its height, you can see how, in fact, the elephant is the king of the jungle, far more so than the lion. Now, when that elephant lies down, the elephant is no less powerful. He's no less powerful. It's the same elephant. So when Krishna is subordinating himself to his devotees, Sake Sudes Kandeo Rohanas says that in the spiritual world, the liberated souls who have performed pious activities for many, many births, they play with Krishna as equals. They engage in Lilas, pastimes of wrestling. And the condition is that if you defeat the opponent, the punishment is that opponent has to take you on his shoulders and carry you around. Krishna's tired of people bowing down to him, praising him, hosannas and hosanas. He's tired of always being the winner. Sometimes he has a desire to be the loser, but he's not going to be the loser to any ordinary, impure, crass person. He's going to play the role of a loser only to his most intimate associates. And therefore, sometimes Krishna loses the wrestling contests in the spiritual world. And as a punishment, he's carrying the children on his back. Now, that Krishna is carrying children, having lost the wrestling match to a 5-year-old companion of himself, is not less than Vishnu, who lies on Anantashesha and who from his breathing and pores come millions and millions of universe. It's the same Krishna, but how powerful is bhakti? How powerful is love? That same Krishna who creates millions and millions of universes from his pores and from his breathing. How much effort, how much conscious effort do we expend when we breathe? Oh, it's insignificant. We don't even take note of the breathing going in and out. It's done automatically without any conscious effort or direction. So that Lord who unconsciously creates millions and millions of universes is carrying one of his cowherd friends on his shoulders as a punishment for having lost the wrestling match. It's the same Krishna. The fact is that that Lord who creates millions and millions of universe has a very kind, sweet heart. And if we approach him with helplessness and affection, and we throw ourselves on his mercy, we'll never be disappointed. He can at his will, and because of the sweetness and kindness of his heart, and because above and beyond all of his power, all of his glory, all of his majesty, he is the servant of his devotees. So not by our efforts, not by our will, not by our mind, our speaking, our seeing, but by his will, he may come down under the purview and within the senses of our childlike self. Doesn't mean he's become inferior. It just means that he's become unlimitedly merciful. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Unlike yesterday, I can actually see your comments today. Shali jumped on, followed by Kelly, Vallabha Chandra, Vinu Vinu. I see your pictures on Facebook, Binu. You and Justin go to some beautiful places. Binu and Justin up there in Ontario, Canada. Uh, Wait a minute, is Calgary in Ontario? Yeah, I think Calgary's in Ontario. Or is it Alberta? Anyway, they're from Calgary, and there's so much beautiful country in that area, and they spend all of their free time hiking and taking pictures. And Bina's always dancing out in the woods. He's always dancing. What a free spirit. Well, thanks for joining us. You're probably in the same time zone because Calgary, when I look on a map, you guys are due north. You're due north of us. Bobby, thanks for joining. Vallabha Chandra has written a nice verse here. Let's see. You can't force your way to the source. There isn't anything you can know or do to make Krishna appear. But the devotee to the Lord is very dear. Just follow a spiritual master's instructions to hear. Then to a few regulative principles you'll want to adhere. After you chant for a while without envy or guile, you may, through Krishna's mercy, eventually see a smile. But you can't make it happen on your own. You can only through sincere practice and service let your desire be known. My mind is exploding with sweetness reading this. This is like honey. This is like candy for the mind. So nicely expressed. You can't force your way to the source. There isn't anything you can know or do to make Krishna appear. But the devotee of the Lord is very dear. Just follow a spiritual master's instructions to hear. Then to a few regulative principles you'll want to adhere. After you chant for a while without any envy or guile, you may, through Krishna's mercy, eventually see a smile. But you can't make it happen all on your own. You can only, through sincere practice and service, let your desire be known. Sweet. Shali says, I'm thirsty for your mercy, which is greater than my mistakes. That line is so beautiful and comforting. Thank you. Thirsty for your mercy, which is greater than my mistakes. I've heard that all it takes to awaken your perfection is a single cry of helpless affection. Vallabha Chandra says further here, there is purification to do before you walk through the pujari door. Start by sitting and hearing on the floor. Shali says, Krishna may come down to you if you show your devotion and love is true. I think you guys got it. I think you understood what we're trying to say here. That means you're you're way above. You're way above those who have no taste for hearing. What to speak of those who refuse to sit on the floor and hear. So thank you. Let's celebrate the mercy of Krishna and the spiritual master upon us and enter into a mood of thanksgiving by chanting Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.